and putting myself on off mute. Good afternoon, everyone. Third time's a charm, and welcome back to 2025. As you can tell, I'm a little bit rusty at this. It's been a little while, but I'm back doing one of my favorite things, which is running through these webinars with our community to talk about, updates that we've done on the platform and new ideas that we've seen in the data community. So today's webinar is just going to be run by myself, and we're going to be talking about taming our data inventories. I think it's a really timely occasion for us to be looking at this because, it ties in with that, first of the year or, New Year's resolution time in our lives where we start looking at things that we want to do over the course of the year. And I think developing a data inventory and starting to build a data inventory that's valuable for our organization is a really important topic. We see that there's reports out there that show that 80% of our time spent by analysts is actually just finding data, not even doing analytics, not even producing cool graphics out of it. Most of the time that we spend trying to do anything with data is just finding where it is and negotiating how we access it. And that's what we're going to be looking at this month and next month is how do we start to pull an inventory together? And then also, how do we start giving that out to people? How do we start helping them actually understand where they can go and how they can fetch data? So now that we've started to see people join, and again, thank you very much for logging on today, is the things that we're going to be covering today are really focused on how we communicate why this is a necessary activity and how we get people thinking about data inventories as a long-term activity. It's not a snapshot in time. It's not a once-off thing. How do we help our organization understand what they need to be doing all the time? We're going to be looking at how we can start to encourage uptake from across our organization and why it's important that we get everybody involved. And then lastly, we'll be doing a little bit of a deep dive into the functionality that Aristotle can provide for those new users, for those early users, to help them really understand, what capabilities are available to get the rest of the organization doing their bit. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump into our first topic, which is just covering this idea that we've been doing a little bit of a push around, is helping people understand this idea of shadow data. And if it sounds scary, it's kind of meant to be, because we're trying to encourage the rest of the organization to think of data as an asset that needs to be controlled and needs to be managed. And shadow data is this idea of data that we just don't know about. And I really love this analogy, this idea of, the iceberg that says, most of the danger of an iceberg is actually what we can't see. It's all of the things lurking beneath the waves. It's the things that we don't know about. And we see that a lot with our data is we have people across our organization who are doing their jobs, opening Excel, opening, any number of business applications nowadays, and getting on with their business, getting on with their role in the organization, and not really telling the rest of the organization that they're collecting that data. And some of that data can be really sensitive. It can be, highly sensitive information around, who's coming along to webinars, for example, or, who are we providing services to, or which of our clients are we paying, or which of our suppliers are we paying, and what are we bringing into our organization? And when this information isn't centrally tracked, when we don't tell people that we're holding this data, we have a real risk of leakage. So shadow data is all of these things that we have outside of our data warehouses. So our data warehouses are, we know them, they're centrally controlled, they're centrally managed, they're very well organized, they're very well structured, and they have a lot of visibility. What we're really talking about is those legacy databases that people aren't telling us about, or the legacy systems that have always been a little bit too hard that can't be migrated for some reason. It's all of the rest of our data that we traditionally don't think about as data. So one of the things that I've seen quite frequently when we engage with clients is we go, do you have very much data? And they go, no, not really. And you go, well, how do you pay people? And how do you know, what invoices have been filled? And how do you know what your staff headcount is? And then they start to get this look of realization that every organization, every business, every government department has a lot of data in our finance and HR systems, and it's really sensitive data. It's some of the most sensitive data that we hold, and we know that we all have it. And those are the kind of data sources that we often see aren't managed. In our data warehouse, we don't put our HR systems into our data warehouse. We leave them in our HR system. But how are we knowing, who's got access and who's got control? We've got any externally sourced data. So again, a lot of people will buy in data sources and they treat it as, somebody else's responsibility. But if I rent an asset for my company, or if I bring a piece of software in, we manage that in a central register. How do we do the same thing for our data? Even if we don't own it, who's responsible for the subscription? Who's responsible for cleaning it up or transforming it into a way that we can use? These are the kind of things that need to be controlled. Otherwise, again, we run the risk of not knowing who to talk to when that subscription's expired. All of a sudden, a really critical data asset that we thought was somebody else's problem, the feed stopped, and now we need to know who to talk to get access to it again. And then lastly, the biggest ones that we see are those ad hoc systems that are managed everywhere. Until we get rid of Excel on everybody's desktop, we're going to have this challenge where business users will be making data sets, and they'll be making transformations, and they'll be doing their work trying to build the analytics that help our organizations function and thrive, but without knowledge of what they're doing. And again, I think we've all come across this problem, and I'll throw it open to audience engagement. Has everybody had this challenge of an Excel spreadsheet that was just a little bit too hard to move into a different system? It controlled too much information. Like, give me a thumbs up if you've ever come across an organization where one of the most critical systems was an Excel spreadsheet on a share drive that probably had far too many people changing it at the same time. Has anybody come across that challenge in their organization? Yeah, there we go. There's always one. There's a couple of you. Like, we know that this is a problem, and we don't want to get rid of it. Like, we don't want to get in the way of people doing their business. We certainly don't want to take away, I think, credit where credit's due. One of the most powerful business applications that's transformed how we do business since, the 1980s. We don't want to get rid of Excel. What we want to do is change how people tell us what they're doing. And the reason for that is that if we don't know what data is being managed, if we don't know what people are doing with their data, we don't know who to talk to. And that's really what this is the biggest challenge that we see is that data is actually, it's not a technical problem, it's a people problem. How do we talk to people to find that critical Excel spreadsheet? How do we talk to people to find out, who's responsible for it, or how I get access, or how to interpret it? We don't know who has the right to access some of these resources. Again, we might need to do, analytics on our HR information or our invoicing information to understand the performance of our company or the organization we work in. Who do we talk to get that, so we can start to do some of those analytics? And I think more importantly right now, and I think, in the last, 48 hours, we've seen DeepSeek coming out of China, an amazingly new, laptop-ready AI agent. When we start feeding data into these new AI systems and these machine learning systems, are they actually able to get the right information? And are they able to interpret that information the right way? So how do we really start to de-risk the organization from these problems? And I guess lastly on this is like, why does this problem exist? Like, I guess, again, throwing up for those thumbs up, have we ever worked in an organization where we know that there's data that's lurking behind the scenes, that's out of sight and out of mind? Throw me a thumbs up if you've ever worked in an organization where there was just that, again, that risk where, people weren't aware of what data was available. They weren't aware of all of the assets that were being held. And that's because of this problem is we don't know how to talk about it, right? And that's one of the things that we at Aristotle Metadata are trying to solve through a number of different ways is how do we help the organization understand that it's actually not a central responsibility, it's a federated responsibility. Everybody who's creating data, and that can be hundreds of people across the organization, they have a little bit of a responsibility to tell us about what data they manage. And that's what we're trying to change here today is how do we change that mindset and how do we use this idea of shadow data to put a little bit of, risk behind the organization and say, if we don't start to change how people's behaviors are, we're not going to know where all of our data is. And part of the challenge with that is because it's not prioritized. I think documentation and infrastructure are usually ongoing long-term back-end projects. They're not building something new. Nobody gets excited about documentation unless you work at a metadata company. I get very excited about it. But if you're not working in an organization that got a laugh out of that one. That's good. If you're not working in an organization that prioritizes documentation, it's usually one of the last things to look at. So the challenge is, what's the right level to do and when? Especially when we're in an environment where we've got all of this legacy information, all of these Excel spreadsheets. How do we start to get people to think about this in a more proactive fashion? Well, fortunately, we've got an answer. What we've been doing and what we talk about quite a lot is what's been framed as the MAST methodology. And it's a framework that we use with a lot of our clients to help them on this journey, because we start to see people at all stages of their data governance processes, from really large, complex organizations that are doing everything well with really, well enforced, really rigorous controls and processes, right up to that first stage, that first interaction where people are going, we know there's a problem, we know there's shadow data, but we don't know how to solve it. And what we've seen is a really, really similar, really consistent process that I'll talk about at the end of this to say, how do we start to get people on this journey? What can we do to really start to get them involved in these problems? And what we've seen is starting small is critical, doing a little bit. When we started doing this, we started with one webinar and then 2 webinars. And then this year, we're going to be doing them every month. So mark them in your calendar. We're going to be doing one webinar a month this year. And it's that idea of starting small. Just doing one activity is really important. And what we've got on the screen is what we call our minimum inventory, a name, a description, a location, and a contact point for who I should talk to about that data. And what we've found is this is a really good starting point. Now, a lot of organizations scoff at this and say, our data is so much more complex than this. But also on the flip side, when we run through training with people, we find that most people don't have this level of information about all those shadow data assets that we've talked about. So the idea is we use this as a way to start early and engage with people to show them why this is important. If we build an inventory out of just these 4 things, can we show the organization how getting a little bit more and a little bit more about every single one of these critical data assets builds out an inventory that becomes really valuable? The other thing that we want to do is make it easy for people, because again, we're talking about people who've never really done data governance before. They've never really done data documentation. And when we run through training, we find that these are some of the 4 easiest things to record about any asset. What's it called? It's our webinar attendees list. Where is it? Well, it's stored in Microsoft Teams. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And if you want to talk to people about how this is being used, our marketing team helps us when we want to send out updates about training and information. So we can actually record this information really, really quickly. So there's no barrier to getting people involved. What we see then is people start to use this as an anchor point to do more documentation around it. Once we've started on this journey, people naturally want to fill in the blanks. 4 isn't enough, and we see those areas that are most interested in documenting their data start to do a little bit more for us anyway. So all of a sudden, we've changed a very process-heavy driven system where we want to go, can you tell us about your data assets? By giving them a really small target to focus on, they naturally go a little bit more. I think, again, we've all seen there's really good pockets of excellence across our organizations, and there's probably areas who are going to give you more information than you can work with, and those are the areas that we want to kind of engage first. So to kind of close out this bit before we jump into the demo, I wanted to talk about a couple of things that we can do to get started now. Oh, I've got a question there. I'll answer that question. Oh, you know what? I'll answer that question right now, Amit. So just as a quick aside, before we kind of close this one out, If we've got Q&A, let's do it. So what we've seen here is the MAST and ideal methodology is designed around 4 really high-level beliefs that we want the organization to believe. Metadata is really important. We need an analytics focus, so we need people to be involved in it. We want to build out S for standards, and we need T for teamwork, which is getting everybody across the organization involved. So these are the beliefs that we want the organization to pick up. With regards to the stages within that, what we see is there's a range of behaviors that we want. So beliefs, what do we want people to know they need to be doing? And then the behaviors, what do we actually want them to do when it starts to come to build this documentation out? Our I is for inventory, which is what we're talking about today. How do we get that high level information, starting with just these 4 information assets, these four pieces of information about our assets? How do we start to get everybody telling us about what data they've got? D is for documentation, for our data and for our metadata, to build out more complex data documentation and data dictionaries. The reason we separate these is because it allows us to talk about them as 2 discrete steps. Really heavy data documentation can be quite time intensive, but a high level inventory is very, very quick. We want to generate those quick wins earlier before we move on to our documentation and then our E for endorsement phase. So endorsement is where we start to really tell the rest of the organization what data certain pockets hold with really good controls around them. A is for auditing. So when we start to see lots of people documenting their data, we naturally see duplication. And this is the phase where we can start to identify, duplicate data, duplicate definitions of data across the organization. So we can build that, that single source of truth that we're focusing on. It's a late stage activity because it generally leads to a lot of collaboration and a lot of different business areas needing to work together to really start to harmonize their data. So we focus on documentation first, endorsing so people know what's there, and then our auditing. And then lastly, our L is for leadership. How do we tell the rest of the organization what we're doing and really reinforcing that flywheel effect? How do we get people understanding that every time they create a new asset, they've got to at least inventory it and run through the rest of the cycle again? And that's what we want to do, is give everybody an operational framework, which is what MAST is a nice operational framework for what we're going to do now and forever in really, really basic terminology, so that everybody knows what they're doing. So thank you for that question, just as a bit of an aside there, and that's why we love to do these live. So what we do there is we really lay out for everybody on a single A4 sheet of paper, and I think you can download it from the mastmethodology.com. It'll take you to one of our landing pages. And on that page, what you'll see is a bunch of resources with more information like this that will really break down how we want the organization to be thinking about it. So moving on, I guess just to kind of close it out, I think the 2 things that I wanted to talk through here is just, really reinforcing this idea that we need to treat data governance and data inventories like a garden. As somebody who went away for a couple of weeks over the Christmas holiday, trust me when I say you can't just plant plants in your garden, plant vegetables in your garden and hope that everything goes well. When you're going to come back, you're going to have lots of weeds. And we see the same problem with data governance, is people expect that they can do a data inventory once and never come back to it, and it's going to be the same high quality that it was. Data changes, people change data, new data is being generated all the time. We need to treat our data inventory like an activity that we routinely come back to. We don't plant things and hope that a garden's going to grow. We have to go in and we have to do that work. We weed, we move plants around, we have to remulch, we have to, fertilize it. The same activities happen with our data inventory. And what we'll see is, for any of you who are hobby gardeners as well, is, a little bit of effort every week is actually much, much easier than massive, pulling out weeds, which is what I'm dealing with at the moment at home. Is I've got an overgrown garden that needs an absolute massive amount of love, more love than I could give it over the Australia Day long weekend, I'll tell you that much. So I'm going to be doing that next weekend because I wasn't there to make sure everything was kept up to date. So what we want to do is do that small maintenance, do that, have a plan for what's happening. So making sure we know, maybe ask the neighbors before you leave, can you just pop over? Make sure none of those weeds are going. Bit of a lesson learned for me on that trip. And then track your progress. Everybody loves to share pictures of their garden. Tell the rest of the organization about what you're achieving. Whilst it might seem small, when we start to see a picture of our assets building in real time, when we start to see more information coming in, it actually gives us really good insights about what's happening across the organization, because not everybody's going to be a leader like we are today. Some people will just kind of, want to see that progress is being made first, and they kind of jump on board. Give them a platform to jump on, give them something that they can join in on, is a really great way to build that traction for your organization. So start small, have a plan, and build traction. Like get people involved, even at that early stage. And that's really what we're going to talk about now. Is we're going to jump in. So we've covered a lot about what we need people to be thinking about, and now we're going to be covering how we're going to do that. So what are we actually going to do? Is I'm going to jump over and I'm going to actually bring up Aristotle, and we're going to talk through how we can do this, because one of the biggest challenges that we see is a lot of people will start this process using, our Excel, templates. We've got Excel templates that are also on that website that we can use to start getting people thinking about building an inventory. The challenge is over time, more people are going to come in, more people are going to have singular assets. So often we have a business area that controls one asset. They don't control everything. They just want to be able to maintain and manage their one asset, their single, what is effectively a single row in an Excel spreadsheet. And they want to add more and more information. When we have lots of people editing these tools over time, we start to see conflicts. And that's what Aristotle's really designed to do, is help organizations start and scale that data governance. So how do we get people understanding, what data they've got, and start to understand that they can go in and edit one thing, much like a Wikipedia page? How do we get them in and editing one thing? So today we're going to look at a couple of different things. We're going to look at how to create a data asset in Aristotle. But more specifically, we're going to look at a couple of really good techniques that we can use to start building this out. So we align with really nice standards. It's the S in MAST. We align with these standards that help us build a consistent view of data. But what we're going to look up is how to build that organizational standard as well. How do we build organizational specific fields that are necessary for you and your organization to start capturing some of that information that may not be used elsewhere? How do we use Aristotle to configure that kind of information? How do we display these inventories? So how do we show it to users? What can we do there to get people understanding, what this looks like and how they can control it? And then lastly, we're going to look at setting up some custom templates and views as well. Because again, whilst we have some really good tooling in there for users to understand, what data is available and where they might go to access it, what we're also going to show is, how to customize that or tailor it using tools in Aristotle so you can make it look a little bit like your system as well. So that's everything we've got there. So what I'm going to do is you're going to listen to me ramble a little bit while I switch my screens over. So I'm going to stop sharing here and I'm going to start sharing over here. So give me just a second. So pop any extra questions. We'll do some more Q&A at the end. So pop any extra questions you've got in the chat at the end, and I'll start sharing my Aristotle right now. So here we go. So everybody should be able to see a really nice dashboard. So this is the dashboard, the default dashboard that every user will see when they log into their Aristotle. So when we've created an Aristotle, we get a really nice dashboard that can be used that shows users what they've been working on most recently. So as you can see, I've been opening issues, I've been editing things, but what I really want to look at today is starting to customize this registry for things that I want to do. And one of the things that we see is really important to organizations is the ability for them to track data and the sensitivity of data. And different organizations, and especially across different countries, will have different rules for what that means. So we're going to set up a really simple example in our administrator tools. So this is something that administrators, I'll just log in with my single sign-on. There we go, extra security. Logging in with my single sign-on, I'm now in my registry administration tools that allows me to control and configure Aristotle to how I need it for my organization. So it comes as a really nice white label solution that you or a professional services partner or Aristotle can configure and tailor specific to your needs. And what we're going to hit is this first one up here, which is these custom fields. What this allows us to do is it allows us to attach to any of the different data asset types in Aristotle specific information that's necessary for me and for my organization. So that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to start by opening my data asset, or sorry, my data set, and I'm going to edit that. And we can see a number of custom fields that have already been set up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down the bottom and start to add some more information specifically for my organization. So what I can do here is I'm going to copy in my sensitivity level because I want people to know, how securely should they treat this data? What should they be doing there? And I want it to come from a structured choice. I don't want them typing anything in. I want to be able to see the different entries that are there. For my API, I'm just going to put in just a little name so that when people are extracting this through some of the automated ways that they know where this field is. And then lastly, I'm just going to copy in some text. So this is just some additional help information, a little bit of metadata, if you might, that helps users understand, what this data is around. How should I treat this? So in this example, we've just said low is aggregated information. Medium has some, aggregated personal information, and then the high sensitivity data is data that has row level personal information that could identify someone. So that here, what we've done is we've gone in and we've added in some information around how users should treat this data. And then lastly, I'm going to add my choices in as well. So these can be free text, they can be dates, but in this example, I'm just going to add in my choices as well. So I can say, a user can only select from these options. So I'm just going to save that now. And those are saved. Now, if I was to go to create some metadata, what I would see is I could scroll down and I could hit, there's an option down here. I can go and create a new data set, and those fields would be configured there as well. But what we're talking about today is not for our advanced users. So this isn't for users who are familiar with the platform. There's a lot of really good ways for users to jump in and start creating content. This is about how we can start to create and tailor this experience to users who are trying to create specific data assets. And that's what we're going to do today. So today, we're not going to jump into our regular editor, which is here. What I want to do is I want to jump into creating some views, and I want to jump into creating some editing or some submission interfaces so users can start telling us about their data as well. So to do that, the first thing I want to do is I want to build an inventory out. Today's theme is really about those inventories. So now that I've created a field that's necessary for me, that's important for my organization, I want to show that to people as well. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to go again back into my administrator tools, and I can start to create, I'm going to go to my dashboard, and I'm going to open my data inventory configuration. So what I have here is the ability for a user to jump in and create a tailored view that looks really similar to an Excel spreadsheet, but has all of the power of Aristotle behind it. So the ability for us to configure fields, to control what users see, and for us to control some of those templates, which we'll look at in our third stage. So I jump in here. What I can do is I can see a number of inventories have been set up, and we're actually going to edit this top one. So I set one up just before this demo, which is our data asset inventory. And this is something that I can show only to specific people. So I've configured this so it's only available to users who've logged in. So if you're from an organization that does publish records out, that does let people know about data that's there, we have that ability to control whether or not a user needs to be logged in or not as well. So when I jump into my inventory, I see all of the information around what's here. So my inventory has currently been set up to have a name, a definition, rights about who can access the data, and when the data was released. A really nice, simple inventory that I can use to educate people around what's there. If I wanted to view that, users will have the ability to open this inventory view, and it will show all of the assets across the database, across the system, based on those fields and those fields alone. So as we can see, it's really now started to tailor this to those users who want to see just the information that's relevant for them. But as I said, I want to bring in some more of that customization. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm actually going to jump in and I'm going to edit it now. So what I want to show people is I want to give them the ability to see and potentially filter on this new field that I've set up. So how can I tailor it for their experience? And I can do that just by scrolling down and dragging that across. So my new sensitivity field is now available for me to put in my inventory. And when I save those changes and refresh my inventory, what we'll see is we'll see my sensitivity level has shown up. But I haven't got any data in there yet. I actually haven't put any data in that's associated with this. And that's, I think, what we're going to look at now. So we've started to tailor this out. We've got it specific to my organization. I know exactly what needs to be managed. How do we tailor it so a user can get a little bit more of a simplified view to access just the fields that we want them to do? The way that we do that is, again, we jump into some of our configuration options, and we're going to go in just for one last deep dive before we see what a user would see. Is, again, we're going to jump back to our administrator tools and have a look at a really cool feature that was released late last year that allows us to manage these templates. So again, a lot of this comes out of the box in Aristotle, and this is designed to help us tailor the experience for our end users as well. How do we put it to them to help them understand what data is available and how they can start to track it? So when I open my manage metadata item views, I can see, again, I've set up an example, and we'll have a look at that in a second. But it shows me all the different templates that have been set up that I can share with users to get them to start submitting this information in. So if I open my data asset template, what I can see here is I've got a name, I've got a potential description if I need to show it, some controls around who has access to it. And now that we're starting to edit this on the fly, I'm going to set it to active so that other users can start filling it in, because I feel like my configuration is starting to get really strong now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two things. One is, there we go, I'm going to find my sensitivity and I'm going to drag that across. So here we can see my name, my definition, my access rights, and my sensitivity. This is the basic inventory that we've configured for users who are just starting out in the organization. So we just want to start capturing that. So we've configured our editor, and we can also configure our view as well. So we can actually control the order and location that certain fields show up if I wanted to control the user experience from that end as well. So we can start to tailor this specific to certain users in the organization. So now that I've saved that, what I'll see is when I go to create my metadata, I have this new template that shows up. I've got a new data asset template that a user can fill, pinned right to the top of the screen. So right at the top, we can put for users a really quick link with really controlled fields that helps them fill this information in. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter one of these for my inventory to show how quick and how simple it is to get users involved in this process. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some legacy information because I want it showing up the top. We've got a lot of previous examples in here, so I'm going to have something that starts before 2020. So we're going to get a little bit retro, and I'm going to create a new data asset template. And this is going to be, just to make sure that it shows up, we'll make a 1999 data collection. What will we call it? Supplier data collection. So some really legacy information. I can associate it with a work group. I can associate it with a team in the registry if I'd like, but I don't want to do that. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to say this is the legacy supplier data for companies providing goods and services to us in the 90s. So we've got a nice description there. It's legacy data. It's about goods and services. And what you would have seen just above it was the system was actually trying to search to see if any similar data was being made available. What I could do right now is I could create this item directly, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go to my components, and I can see we've got this one extra field, our rights. So only available to users in the supplier engagement field department. So we've said who can actually access this data. So this isn't data that anybody is able to access. We're not uploading anything in. What we're describing is really who has the rights and access to see this information. And on our custom area, I'm going to say, well, that's not right. Our sensitivity has not come across correctly. I'll check my configuration. I love live demos, but for the purposes of this example, we'll just put it in as high. We'll come back to that in a second. We'll check that after the recording's finished. But what we should have seen there is if I'd copied it incorrectly and I wasn't under pressure of being on video, we would have had a nice drop down there as well. So what you can see is we can actually have rich text here. So if we wanted to, we could start to record all that information as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just click create item, and all that information is going to be saved in. So in about 2 minutes, we've created an asset and we've shown it in the system. So what we've got here is a really nice simplified view of what that template looks like, that a user can come back to and edit. So they can actually come back at any time as part of that garden activity, as part of that continuous upkeep. And as new information becomes available, they can start to document that as well. So the idea is that the interfaces are designed to be very Word-like, very Wikipedia-like, rather than being something like they'd see traditionally in an Excel spreadsheet, because we do want to capture that rich text. There's a lot of information around our data assets that needs to be captured, that we haven't even dug into right now. So what we want to do is just start to get users thinking about this as a really simple activity. The reason why that's as important is for each time this is done, every time a user comes in and adds more information, this inventory continues to get populated. So if I was to refresh this, what we'll see now is that collection starts to come up as well. So the information that's being fed through from our templates is coming into our inventory as well. The idea being that we start to get more and more information available to end users so that they can start to document their assets, but also feeding that information to our data governance areas so they start to understand what's happening across the rest of the organization, so they can take on more of a support role to support that governance and documentation, rather than having to document assets they don't control. And that's really everything that we were going to be covering today, is just a really basic level of looking at how we start to make this inventory activity quick and easy for users. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint, because that's really all we wanted to cover today. So I'm going to go jump to my stop sharing button, and I'm just going to bring up the slides again. So that's everything that we were going to cover there. What we're actually going to be doing is in mid-February, we're actually going to be looking at data sharing and data accessibility. And then in March, we've got a webinar coming up looking at furthering that data documentation as well. So we've got a couple of webinars coming up that people should be really interested in, that start to look at how we can build out those inventories and build out that documentation to start to get a richer understanding for everything that's inside those assets. But today, because it's the first of the year, it's our first webinar back, what we really wanted to look at was how we start to get the rest of the organization changing those attitudes and changing those behaviors. If you're interested in learning more, there's probably a couple of things that you can look at. So we actually do have a sign-up system. So if you're looking at starting to trial that Aristotle registry out, if you go to aristotlemetadata.com/signup, we actually have a way that you can start to trial those registries as well. And we've also got upcoming training, not just on Aristotle, but something that I'll pop in the chat right now before I start doing Q&A. What we actually do as well is we have mass training that goes through that entire methodology, a little bit more than just a 5-minute overview that I did, but being able to come along to training and learn everything around how we're encouraging this change in perception and this change in how we want users to behave when it comes to data as well. So I think that brings us pretty much to the end of our webinar today. So thanks everybody for attending, and thank you all for the questions as well. What we're going to do is we're going to split it up here. So I'm just going to go. Thanks for attending, everybody. Really appreciate you coming along, and we'll see you at the next webinar. But I'm putting a pause in there because we're actually going to jump to the Q&A now. So we're going to slice the recording there, so Q&A won't come up in our recording, and because we'll publish this on YouTube. But I did have a bunch of Q&A that I wanted to jump through as well. So looking at our chat, I did see somebody ask about sharing the pack. Yes, as I said, we'll be doing more than that. We'll actually be sharing the recording as well. So we'll make the recording available through YouTube. You'll probably see it on LinkedIn as well. So if you do see it on social media, give it a like. The best way for us to build a community of practice around this is to, make sure that people are seeing the same resources you are. Give people the other chance to, really start to dig into this information, because data governance isn't difficult. Going back into, we've got another question here. Does the identification or logging of shadow data rely purely on reported stakeholders, or do we have an agent? The answer there is actually a little bit of both. So we do have a tool, and we'll be talking about that next month as well. We'll be launching a new tool around data discovery, around automated agents. But one of the questions that we like to say around that is, how do you automate if you don't know that it exists? Automation seems to be something that people jump to as a solution for a lot of these things. But if you don't know a data asset exists, how are you going to scan it? So that's what we try and do is prior to scanning, we need to do this discovery piece of getting the rest of the organization thinking about and telling us about their data. If you've got an Excel spreadsheet sitting in your laptop that runs a finance process or runs a reporting process that's critical for the organization, I'm not going to be able to scan your laptop. That's not something that can be done. So how do we change that behavior and get people telling us about data? And that's one of the reasons why we did that demo today, is to say it's actually really quick and easy for people to start thinking about that. And also we want to get people thinking about what they need to tell us about their data as well. So how do we get the rest of the organization telling us that they've created a new data asset? And that could be, a new view in a data warehouse. It could be a new table. It could be a new Excel spreadsheet, because often our automated scanners can tell us what's happened, but not why. Why did you link those two columns together? Why did you transform this data in a particular way? Why did you remove one of those columns from reporting? It's that why that's that analytic process in MAST. The why is a really important piece of data, so that we can build that trust, so that our agents know what they're looking at when we start building that automation out. So hopefully that answered the question there from Thomas. Are there any other questions on that kind of topic? That did. Thanks. Oh, good to hear. I'm more than happy to stick around. Usually we stick around for a little bit of extra Q&A. I think people can go off mute during this period. If not, type them in the chat. Otherwise, usually I give it a few minutes and then I just get rambly, and then we usually shut it off at around 1:45. But if there are questions coming in, I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer. Yeah, so I guess, just to kind of close that one out, though, I think, we need to get people thinking in how people and automation can work together is really the theme there. Yeah, I think in that case, I'm not seeing anybody else starting to type. I'm not seeing any things coming through the Q&A. So what I will do is I'll give the final close out here. So thanks everybody for those extra questions as well online. As I said, we do trim the Q&A part out so that it won't be included in the YouTube, so we can kind of talk as people. We can mention names. Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, so what you'll see is we'll send out a lot of links. We'll send out the decks as well. And then if you're interested, you'll be able to view the online video as well. Hopefully that covers everything, and nobody's kind of jumped in with any questions. So given that we're at time, we're at 1:45. I'm going to say thanks everybody for coming along, and hopefully we'll see you at the next webinar in a couple of months, or in a month, not in a couple of months. We're going to start planning it tomorrow. So thanks everybody. We'll see you at the next one. Bye-bye.